Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for stopping by again. This is going to be a fairly basic information this time. I often talk about these subjects in a variety of other videos, sometimes in a considerable detail, but it doesn't mean that a lot of you have actually seen those other videos. I have about 100 of them. At least I think 70 or 80 of them are active at the moment. You don't get to hear that answer. Something very basic until you get to it, one of those videos. So, given that this is the time of year where we begin to have more and more people coming down for the first time, I get more and more emails. I get them all the time. They ask many of the same questions that I've already answered here somewhere else. Through no fault of their own, they have no idea what that answer is. So you're doing exactly the right thing when you're asking me a question, no matter, especially a basic one. Because if you haven't read it, and it's important, you need to know, so ask. But in any event, I want to just talk about a few of them, each one fairly briefly today, to give you some idea of what some of these topics, how I respond to them. Now, one of those is the rainy season. October and November are the heaviest rain months in Panama City, traditionally. Likewise along the canal route. October, particularly so in the city, November just a little bit behind it, and they just outrank all the other months in the year when it comes to rain. So this, right now, it's October, late October. This is rainy season in Panama. Actually, this year has been not anywhere near as rainy as we prefer to have it. It's below average. One of the lower years. We don't like that. This water is not only obviously useful for the canal, but for our hydroelectric plants and so forth, what have you, it's critical. We started out this season with serious concerns about major problems because the El Nino weather pattern, and I won't bother trying to explain that, but it's been around for a long time, hundreds of years in all likelihood. This is something that comes every once in a while, but every few years, and when it does, we tend to get less rain. And there was a very great concern. We were prepared for a drought, basically, a very real likelihood of it. It didn't turn out that way, but it did end up being a lower rain year so far. We're not finished yet. But I suspect even by the end of November, unless we have a sudden series of downpours here, it's going to be below average. Now, people up north very frequently, they get all upset and concerned about rainy season. They visualize typhoons. We don't have hurricanes, for example. We don't have that kind of storm, thank heavens. But that it's just like pouring rain day after day. And no. We have rain. In the rainy season, basically it boils down to this. In many tropical countries, the only difference that it can be called seasonal is one of the amount of rainfall. And this happens to be one of those countries where there's more rainfall and higher levels of humidity, but especially rainfall during certain months of the year and less so in the others. So where there's less of it, then that's called summer. And that's what we call it here. And it starts in December. And it isn't because we're south of the equator, we're not, we're north of the equator, but it's because that's when the really good weather begins. And then the rainy season is what we call winter here, because it's not as nice as the dry weather, and so on. We make a big deal out of it because it's about all we have to make a big deal out of. Our leaves don't change colors. Some of our trees do, but we have plant life goes through multiple changes over the course of a year. It's fantastic. It's the tropics, but we don't have the fall change or autumn leaf changes, for example, and we definitely do not have snow. We don't have a lot of stuff that is particularly noteworthy in terms of weather. You often, during the rainy season, like right now, you go to a weather channel or someplace that will give predictions of the weather of the next 10 days and so forth, and almost every day will say, chance of thunder showers. Well, yeah, this is rainy season, but it doesn't mean it's going to rain every day, because it doesn't, definitely. Now, but it does from time to time, and we hopefully a little bit more frequently than it has been recently. But I've got a photo here This is taken by Ed. You're going to meet Ed one of these days. We're getting that arranged for him to stop by and talk. He's been here for a few months now. He is a neighbor, and he took this photo from his balcony, and it's a beautiful day. Especially nice one, I must say. This is a really super photo. We don't often get quite as that balance of clouds and sky. Yeah, it's just very nice. Then I went out during a storm recently, and my balcony, which shows a view very similar to Ed's, and took this photo. And as you can see, it does rain, and this is a really heavy rain. If I show this to people, they panic. They think, oh, that's terrible. It lasted about an hour and a half, 2 hours, probably. And it was light, an hour and a half. The rest of it was relatively light in comparison, and finally it fizzled out. It's not the end of the world. It is messy to have to drive in, so hopefully you're not stuck out on the road when it hits. But it's nothing you can't find in 150 other countries in the world at various times of the year. It's nothing to get concerned about. But do come out if you're concerned about it. As some people do, they actually come down here to visit in rainy season, and then they forget it's rainy season while they're down here. Okay, now another one is cost of living. That's a big one. The assumption is the one area that's particularly concerning to me is people's automatic assumption that if you're out in the countryside, it's cheaper than living in the city. Well, there are two things basically operational here, and one of those is, as far as cost of living is concerned, a lot of it depends on you, and really does. It's your own sense of how important it is to you to save money, to budget your money, and whether you follow through on it. And this is true for humans everywhere in the world in all sorts of localities. But in Panama City, we have available to us everything under the sun, basically, if you can find it. And you can find some very expensive stuff here. If you want to spend $5,000 a month, you can do it. I mean, it'd be crazy, but you could do that. But it's not that everybody has to, and they certainly don't, even close to that. But they may get by on $2,000 a month here, and they may have roughly the same amount in the countryside. The reason being is that housing isn't that much cheaper. That is, the housing that expatriates want isn't that much cheaper out in the more distant parts of the country than it is here in the city. This has been especially true in the recent last year or two, as we're going through this sort of recessionary period here. The prices for sale of homes and for rental here in the city are really much lower than they have been in the past. And they have also declined out in the countryside to a lesser extent. The exception being the coast to the immediate west of the city, the Coronado area. You know it is. That's typically what you have heard, the word you've heard associated with it. That's really a mini disaster area right now, is that they're in bad shape. So, yeah, things are cheaper there, but that could take some time to turn around. The rest of the country is definitely, it's definitely a good time to buy, a good time to rent. No doubt in my mind about that at all, and I've mentioned it several times here. But it isn't that it's a lot cheaper outside in the countryside. And basically, building materials cost what they cost. Expatriate housing is pretty much the same wherever it goes. You can actually find better deals often in this city because they're condominiums, and you're not buying a piece of land to go with it. But if you want that piece of land, it's important for you to be have a lawn and a yard, which is going to be a real active sort of responsibility in the tropics. But if you do, and a lot of people do, you definitely want to go out in the countryside. You don't want to try to buy that in the city itself. It'd be way too expensive. But otherwise, housing here is not. We just had the Metro Match program. We have one gentleman here, and he was determined. He knew what he wanted, and we helped him. He bargained hard, and he purchased a house for around $150,000 in that neighborhood, or a condominium, I should say. And he's done very well. He's got a very good price for it. hats off to him and to the agent that I helped him with or sent to help him. She did a good job, and they did very well on that. But it's not as if a place like that or similar with amenities or what have you in the countryside would have cost $75,000. No. Could easily have spent that much. Part of the problem was that expatriates came down 10, 15 years ago and started really buying. They drove prices way up. And many of them themselves purchased here. And now they are at an age when they'd like to sell, and they want much higher prices than the market will bear down. So it's not always Panamanians, especially in the countryside, where there are fewer Panamanian-owned developments outside the beach area and the area directly west of the city. Most of it in Boquete, Bocan, what have you now are individuals or smaller projects. And they can be expensive. So don't assume that it's going to be cheaper. You may be disappointed. And of course, gasoline costs the same pretty much everywhere. And worse yet, so to speak, I shouldn't say it that way, but it's the way it is, basically, is that they're getting, the good news is that they are getting so much more out of the West now. In the rural areas, the better stores, the better restaurants, all sorts of things are opening up, and there are many amenities available that simply were not there 10 years ago. Well, there you go. What I've often said is availability that's number one. So now you have to walk into stores and you see things that you like, and you know you like them, but you didn't see them, say, 5 years ago. But there they are, and they cost more money, but the temptation to buy them is strong because there's things you're familiar with from home and wherever that may be. And yeah, so on. So it can be difficult. You can end up spending more money. So cost of living in Panama, they like to say it's 20 to 40% less than wherever you come from. How do they know? Nobody knows. It's, if you're from California, yeah, we're going to be a lot cheaper down here, trust me. But if you're from South Dakota, or you're from Saskatchewan, or or the south of Italy, it's a completely different story. So you need to figure that out when you get here. But to assume that it's going to be more expensive or cheaper in one area or another is not a good idea. And you normally will find, certainly in the city, but also out in the countryside, there's a range. And the question is what fits in your budget in that area, is that what you want? And that's something you have to decide for yourself. But don't assume that an area has cheaper prices than another based on simply what you've read on the internet. Okay. Do you need Spanish? Now, very quickly deal with that one. The answer to that is no, you don't. A lot of people don't have it when they come down, and they get along quite well without it for a long time. But it depends on how much they want to get involved with local society. Excuse me, I'm going to take a break here for just a moment. Sorry to be absent there. Thanks for giving me a chance to get something to drink. And in the process, I also ate dinner. That's the wonderful thing about taking a break in the middle of a video. Nobody needs to know that, but still, it's going to be easier for me to complete this now. Talking about Spanish, it really boils down to very simple things. And don't get upset. Don't get so nervous about it. Don't worry that much about it. Really, seriously. Particularly these days, if you have a smartphone, and most people do, it's free to go in and get the Google Translator app, for example. There are other translator apps too that some people use. Google is very widely used. It's the one that I use simply because I know it's there, so I downloaded it. It does a very good job. I can type in what it is I need to translate, or I can just speak into it, and it will do it by voice recognition. I can say something in English, have it up here in front of me, and I can talk into it, and it will translate it right in text into Spanish. I turn the phone over to the person I'm talking to, and he or she's going to see it in Spanish, and they can talk into it, or many of them just use their thumbs like most people do and text back and answer in Spanish, and then I get it in English. And once you get into it, it's very easy and it's pretty quick. especially as in my case, I've got the basic Spanish is there. I'm fitting in certain words and so on. That's often the biggest problem, is to forget a tense or a specific vocabulary word. And that can be dealt with very quickly, very easily, and then you can move on with the rest of the conversation. So it's there. We've got the aids that we can carry right around with us in our pockets, so to speak, to take care of situations where we need a translation and we can't do it ourselves. So yeah, it's there. I encourage people to learn the language, particularly if they're planning to deal with Panamanians and speaking Spanish, who expect them to speak Spanish, of course, on a regular basis. It's up to you. All I'm concerned with letting you know right now is it's definitely not a reason for not coming down. Modern technology can help with that. So let's use it when it's helpful. This is a plan when it's very helpful. And in the process of using the translation app, you learn the language too. It's a great way, in a practical way, to learn the words and learn what to say in the midst of an average workday, so that it really sticks with you. Because often, instead of turning it to them to read, I'll just say it. You'll learn how to pronounce it. Don't worry. That's the critical thing. So Spanish is not the issue that a lot of people are concerned that it will be. Now, the last one is a difficult one to deal with. I call it social media problems. I tried this already, and it took too much time, using too many examples. In every country, and certainly in every major city, and this one is metro area now is probably going to be next year's, in the census, about 2.3, 2.4 million, of whom roughly 2 million will be really relatively together in an area that's easily traveled through. It's a pretty big metro area. But in any case, it's way big enough to have all sorts of things happen. One neighborhood will have lose its electricity. We had it here once this year for about, it must have been 3 hours or so. All the condo buildings here have their own generators. So the generators went on, and so the elevators worked, and the hall lighting and everything else. But it doesn't work for my electricity inside the house. So it's a little disturbing. Of course, I lose computer access and so forth. But I just walk out to the balcony, and there, usually within minutes, the electric company people are there, and their ladder trucks and what have you, and they're up there working with the wires, and we'll have it done. And sometimes very quickly, sometimes a little longer, but then bam, it's over with, and we get on with our lives. This is occasionally some neighborhoods will have a severe problem. That neighborhood will have a problem, and they may lose their electricity for a while. They may for 2 or 3 days, something of that sort. I can't remember any offhand, but I have no doubt that it happens once in a blue moon. Not so much down in the central part of town where a lot of expats live, because this is where a lot of business is, and that's what keeps this country operating. And so it really, they keep the electricity rolling here, but they do everywhere. It's not an issue, and yet I still get people who hear on social media or whatever, there are blackouts in Panama, or there are gas pipes. We had an accident out in the eastern part of the city where there was an explosion from gas pipes in a development, and an apartment was totaled. It was a very unpleasant thing, caused a big stir, forced a lot of the city simply said, and people in a similar situation would have those pipes inspected by the fire department to be sure that they met standards, and if they did not, they were required to. Now, if you're in a building where it's been found to be sub-service and it's just not acceptable and it has to be replaced, that is a real challenge. But it's very rare, and it's not an issue here. I haven't read about it for quite a while. I feel very sorry for the people probably in an older building that have a system that is not up to snuff, even though the one that had problems was not that old, the building. So it's good to have it checked. Fine. Ours didn't have any problems. It just happens. They go through, they do this routine, and it's exactly what should happen, is what I'm saying. And yet I still get emails saying, it must be awful not to have any gas. Well, we have gas. Or it must be awful that your electricity goes off for days, and blackouts. What a word. And so many others that will be single incidents. There are sometimes when things are scheduled, as when the National Bank of Panama was scheduled to be closed, different departments closed at different times over a 3-day period as they changed the software platform for the bank. And it was advertised all over the country. It was in all the newspapers. It was on television. It was on radio, talk radio. My bank had little signs up in Spanish at the cashier saying that the National Bank was being closed for certain hours and certain days for certain types of activities, would have no impact on us whatsoever, not to worry about it. It was strictly internal to their process. So it's all over and done with. I happened to be over near the National Bank, one of its offices, on one of the days when it was closed down, and I saw it. I'd forgotten for a moment. I looked at it and I thought, what's going on? It looks like it's closed down. And I went up and I asked the guard. I said, oh, yeah. And I remembered. I said, yes, okay, I'm sorry. And I realized, yeah, all right, this is when they closed it down. No big deal. I did see some Panamanians come up, and because people don't always read the newspaper, they don't always listen to the news, so even some Panamanians missed the fact that this closing was going to happen, or simply forgot when it was going to happen, as I had. So that's it. I start getting emails coming in from the north saying, wow, we hear the National Bank of Panama has closed its doors. There's some terrible thing is happening. And I'm saying, what? A few people down here who can't read Spanish or don't make an effort, who don't make any effort to find out actually what's going on, they went and they tried to pay some sort of fee, which we often do for government fees, whatever, at the National Bank, and it was closed. Instead of finding out why, maybe because they didn't speak the darn Spanish anyhow, and they're going to try to learn it now, and stomping off, they started telling people up north, oh my gosh, something awful is happening, the National Bank has closed its doors. So I'm on this end saying, no, it hasn't. No, this is the story. And despite saying that, I would have, at least one guy wrote back, he said, it still sounds suspicious to me. And I said, there's nothing suspicious about it. It's a question of just being aware of your environment and what's going on. So you'll have people who jump to that sort of conclusion, and off it goes, and you may come across it somewhere. And some websites that are commercial websites, they need something to get you to come back again. So anything that goes wrong down here, something that's like sexy, it's the sort of thing that draws viewers. They're gonna blow it out of proportion, let everybody know, and then I get the emails coming down, and I go read some of the stuff that's said, and I go, well, it's a free internet. You can say pretty much what you want to, and we all know that can lead to a lot of confusion. So keep that in mind. And if you're talking about an individual, one person, if it's some really powerful thing, you should get some sort of evidence, something to back it up, other than the opinion of one person. And if it's a problem they are definitely having, feel very sorry for them. Feel very sympathetic. But if they start saying this is the way it is everywhere in Panama and the Panamanians don't care and this, just ignore it. That person's emotionally upset. They're not happy right now. And the same thing happens, I can assure you, in your own country. There's this great Facebook page, I think it's called Grumpy Expat. And you go in and you hear people just rip Switzerland up and down their lines. Sweden's a terrible place. Germany, oh my God, France, Italy, Spain. A lot of European nations are just terribly attacked by people from other parts of Europe and from North America and Asia and so forth. And I sit there and think, well, this is the way it is. You always have some folks like that. So keep that in mind. If there's some horrible thing you think is happening, it's a terrible disaster, and I haven't said anything here, feel free to write and ask. And if it's not an issue, I will let you know. And if it is, probably I'll be talking about it sometime. Anyhow, that's enough for now. These are the questions that I do frequently get asked, and I do my best to respond to as well as I can. So there are others, and maybe we'll hit a few of those coming up too. As I hear you coming down, those who are coming down, I'm getting more and more information. I'm going to be talking a little bit more over the next few weeks, a little bit more in the video tube, YouTube, to a number of things dealing with this, because the activity level is rising, and I want to be as helpful as I can as time allows. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I hope to have a chance to talk to you again.